Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, closer than expected and far from over. This morning, millions of votes are still being counted in these high-stakes midterm elections. Right now, the balance of power in Congress still up in the air, and several races too close or too early to call. But we are seeing some victories for both sides of the aisle in major battleground states. In Pennsylvania, a key win for Democrats in the race for Senate, with NBC News projecting John Fetterman winner over Dr. Mehmet Oz.
I never expected that we were going to turn these red counties blue, but we did what we needed to do. That's why I'll be the next U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania.
When all the ballots are counted, we believe we will win this race.
And in Georgia, a close race for that open Senate seat, with both candidates bracing for a runoff.
I'm telling you right now, I'm like Ricky Bobby. I don't come to lose.
So y'all just hang in there. I'm feeling good. I do. I feel good.
At the state level, several important governor's races still undecided this morning. It's not quite the red wave Republicans were hoping for, but some of the biggest players in the party, including former President Donald Trump, are holding out hope.
It has been a very exciting night. We have some races that are hot and heavy.
When you wake up tomorrow, we will be in the majority and Nancy Pelosi will be in the minority.
Yeah! We have full team coverage ahead for you this morning, checking in with all the key races from coast to coast. And we're going to kick things off with NBC News senior political editor Mark Murray, who joins us here on set. Will be with us over the course of the next hour. Mark, good to have you with us. So still a number of key races have not been called. A few actually have been called, maybe surprisingly early, earlier than we expected. So far, what's the key takeaway?
I think another election, another surprise. I've been doing this for quite a while. And you look back at 2016, even the 2020 presidential election, and you kind of see where the winds are blowing that last week or two before the election. And then come election night, you see the returns and you get a really big surprise. And I don't think many people were thinking that the House of Representatives would still be uncalled right now. Republicans only needed to flip 5 seats, a total of 5 seats to win back. This is the lowest threshold that you would needed since 1932. So it wasn't a high bar to clear, and they still haven't cleared it yet. And you ended up hearing from the sound from House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, we expect to do it. That's probably correct, but if they do end up winning the House, it might be by only a few House seats, but we still have a lot of counting still to do. Then, the battle for the Senate is still undecided as well, too. But Democrats might find themselves in a position over the next 24 to 48 hours to kind of find out, will they end up controlling the House of Representatives, or I'm sorry, the Senate, and then also about that runoff that we would end up seeing potentially in Georgia.
Which is where the Senate could be decided ultimately.
Yeah, ultimately, and maybe not till next month. All right, Mark, let's talk now about Pennsylvania, of course. It was your hottest take for us yesterday. When I woke up about 3:40 this morning, it was called. I was surprised to see that. We talked about the potential for that to go on for quite some time. Talk about how crucial that is for Democrats in terms of potentially keeping control of the Senate. And I'd love to know if you were surprised by how early it was called.
I was surprised, and the reason why it's so big is that Democrats, that's the first Senate pickup of the evening. And now all of a sudden, with the remaining contests, it forces Republicans to have to win in Arizona or in Nevada, or to be able to do, the pressure's on them to go and win. And had Mehmet Oz been able to win, or we didn't know the status of that for a while, you would actually think that Republicans are probably the smart money to win the United States Senate. But now I think it's a completely jump ball, and the race that I'm going to be really following over the next 24 hours is Nevada. Right now, you end up having a situation where Catherine Cortez Masto is trailing by a couple percentage points, but the remaining vote is a lot of mail-in ballots in places like Washoe County, Clark County, the two biggest counties in Nevada. And so we're going to have to count those votes to see where they are. But it would not surprise me that Democrats could, once we find out all that ballots, because we could know if they still retain control of the U.S. Senate.
And Warren, Nevada could take 10 days.
Yeah, just going to say, we should warn people Nevada is a little slow when it comes to counting some of these remaining ballots.
I was surprised by how quickly we saw Pennsylvania in the ballots. You know, the guidance that we'd all discussed, it's going to take a few days. And we called Pennsylvania last night.
Bottom line, Republicans were hoping for a red wave. Clearly, this is not a red wave. I mean, Lindsey Graham said so much. Are we understanding why? Is it either exit polling is telling us why that didn't happen, or the results in specific places? Why are Democrats outperforming expectations?
Joe, our last NBC News poll gave us a really big clue on why last night was a bit of a surprise, and that was that Democrats caught up to Republicans in enthusiasm. And normally one of the big reasons why the party that's in power ends up losing big in a midterm cycle is that the opposition is just more fired up. And our poll showed that Democrats were dead even in enthusiasm. And I think we ended up seeing that in the results last night. And I think it is still important to note, like, you know, Republicans still can end up winning control of the U.S. House. They can end up winning control of the United States Senate either in the days or weeks following. But I think you're exactly right. The totality of this election right now, and we still have lots of races to count, is that this looks a whole lot more like a red ripple than a red wave.
All right, so if you're just waking up with us this morning, Pennsylvania, obviously big news overnight. Nevada, like we just said, could take up to 10 days. It's just going to take as long as it's going to take to count all those votes. Georgia, potentially, most likely, headed to a runoff not until next month. So what are you looking out for today? In the next few hours this morning while we're on the air, what are you looking for?
Again, I'm going back to Nevada. And Joe's exactly right. It could be a while to count all those mail-in ballots. Remember, Nevada is now a big mail state. And so I think that, you know, but how the count goes in places like Clark County, which is the Las Vegas area, as well as Washoe, which is Reno, and the remaining vote there, to me, is the entire ball game before we even get to, hey, what would be a runoff in Georgia? And that's why because I think it is much more likely we're going to know the outcome of Nevada either in the next 24 hours or the next few days than we would know the outcome of Georgia, which might not be until December.
The bottom line is Democrats have already flipped one seat, so Republicans have to flip at least one more, and basically two at this point.
Correct. The pressure's on them right now.
All right. Mark Murray, thank you so much. You're going to be sticking around throughout the hour here, so we'll be checking back with you throughout that time.
Yeah, and jump in on any of these conversations here, Mark. So let's start digging into Pennsylvania a little more. Bring in NBC News correspondent Maura Barrett. Maura, great to see you. Thanks for being with us on this big day. So, of course, the Senate is the conversation here. Turned into a big victory for Democrats, flipping a seat. In fact, John Fetterman, the state's lieutenant governor, the projected winner over TV doctor Mehmet Oz. Talk to us about Fetterman's win and how we got here.
Well, guys, the fact that I'm not talking to you from a ballot processing center is frankly absolutely shocking, as you heard from Mark as well. The fact that this was called overnight was not expected by any means here in Pennsylvania. We're used to it taking quite a few days, as you might remember from 2020, and we were expecting a very tight race between Fetterman and Oz, and the margins just showed overnight that NBC News could project Fetterman to take over Republican Pat Toomey's seat. He's retiring in the new year. And this is something that we'd obviously been closely watching, the most expensive race in the country, and obviously looking at that pressure on who could be taking control of the Senate. John Fetterman coming out overnight, making a victory speech with a massive grin on his face, thanking his supporters and saying he felt humble. Take a listen to some of that speech overnight.
We launched this campaign almost 2 years ago. And we had our slogan. It's on every one of those signs right now. Every county, every vote. I never expected that we were going to turn these red counties blue, but we did what we needed to do, and we had that conversation across every one of those counties. That's why I'll be the next U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania.
John Fetterman had cast himself as an underdog in this race, but leaned heavily on his experience as a mayor over in Western Pennsylvania in Braddock. And he did allude there, too. He said his strategy of the campaign to go to every county, every vote, he wanted to cull Republican votes away from typically Republican-held counties. He never expected to flip those, but we did see that happen, especially in some of these collar counties around Philadelphia, which is what makes Pennsylvania so purple. He really leaned into into the fact that his campaign wanted to focus on the issues around the right to an abortion, threats to democracy, something that Democrats in Pennsylvania and some more moderate Republicans had said that they were very concerned about. So again, very much a surprise that this race was called overnight, but a good indication, as you heard from Mark, about Democrats right now.
Yeah, so Mara, we should note NBC News and other major news organizations have called this one, projecting that Fetterman's going to win. What is Dr. Oz saying? As of 7:10 a.m. Pennsylvania time, has he conceded yet?
We have not heard an official concession as far as I'm aware, Joe. Dr. Oz has been a little cagey around media. We saw the same from the gubernatorial candidate, Doug Mastriano, very much distanced from media. But Dr. Oz did come out earlier in the night before NBC News projected that winner to speak to his supporters. I wanted you to hear what he said.
When all the ballots are counted, we believe we will win this race. We've been closing the gap all night, and we have a lot more ballots to go.
Now, to be clear, ballots are still being counted. A big chunk, thousands of mail-in ballots here in Philadelphia still being counted as we speak. But we do know that those lean heavily Democratic. And when it comes to the election-denying rhetoric that we've seen from a lot of the far-right Republicans in the state and former President Trump, who did endorse Dr. Oz just appearing with him on stage less than a week ago in the final run-up to this election, he had kind of rolled back that rhetoric in terms of trying to be associated with former President Trump, casting himself as more of a moderate. So we don't know how exactly he's going to take this approach, but as of right now, he is not officially conceded, guys.
Maura, let's switch over and talk about the race for governor in Pennsylvania. We also have a projected winner here, Josh Shapiro. What should we know?
So what's interesting when you look at the overlap between the John Fetterman race and Josh Shapiro is the difference in the split. John Fetterman has about a little less than a 3-point lead over Dr. Oz right now, whereas Josh Shapiro is able to come out on top of his opponent, Doug Mastriano, by about 13 points. So that shows some split ticket situations happening between Republicans and Democrats. Shapiro really leaning in to bringing over more moderate Republicans, while Doug Mastriano really was focusing on former President Trump's base, that far-right conservative base. So it does give you some indication on how Pennsylvanians were thinking in that sense in terms of who they might be supporting in 2024 and what might resonate with those voters. But Josh Shapiro thanking his supporters last night, earlier in the night, that race being called before midnight. And so this is something that kind of shows, given the state of the swing state that Pennsylvania is very, very purple, how moderates might be thinking leading up into the next couple of years. Guys?
All right, Maura Barrett in Pennsylvania for us. Lots of news there this morning. Thank you, Maura.
Let's head over to Georgia now, a place we might be heading to a lot in the next month. That fiercely contested Senate showdown between Democratic incumbent Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker remains too close to call right now.
But in the equally dramatic race for governor, NBC News is projecting incumbent Republican Brian Kemp as the winner. Here he is speaking on his victory over Democrat Stacey Abrams.
Across the country tonight, we took the first step in saving America. This election proves that when Republicans stay focused on real-world solutions that put hard-working people first, we can win now, but also in the future, y'all. So I tell you, let's celebrate this historic victory. While knowing there's still plenty of work to do.
NBC News correspondent Tremaine Lee is in Atlanta for us this morning. We're also joined by Greg Bluestein. He is a senior political reporter at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Good morning. Good to have both of you with us. Tremaine, I want to start with you. That incredibly tight Senate race between Warnock and Walker. Where do things stand right now?
That's right, Joe. This was expected to be a tight race all along, and it lived up to the hype. It's a nail-biter, a really thin margin between these two men. Just about 20,000 votes separate them. Raphael Warnock seems to be on top. But again, neither of these men were able to get over that 50% mark, which would have declared a winner sooner than not. So it looks like that this race may be headed to a December 6th runoff election, lest we forget that Raphael Warnock was actually put in the office through a runoff. And so, again, razor thin. Looks like it's headed to a runoff. But let's hear from Raphael Warnock. This was not long after the polls closed last night. Check it out.
We are not sure if this journey is over tonight or if there's still a little work yet to do. But here's what we do know. We know that when they're finished counting the votes from today's election, that we're going to have received more votes than my opponent. We know that. I remain as committed to this work as I have ever been, and I look forward to continuing on that journey together over the next 6 years.
So the stakes were already high. Now perhaps the stakes even higher for folks here in Georgia. So I guess we're headed possibly to that runoff in December.
Yeah, absolutely. Greg, now this race in particular, I mean, it's really been a battle from the start. There's obviously been a lot of drama surrounding the race, made quite a bit of national news here. Let's talk about, is there any room for Warnock to be disappointed at how close this race has turned out since he is the incumbent, especially with all these controversial allegations surrounding Walker ahead of the vote? Or do you think he anticipated it being this tough and that runoff being the end result?
I think it's your latter point. He's the last Democrat standing here in Georgia in a statewide race. Every other Democratic challenger or candidate for office, including Stacey Abrams, went down, and not only went down, but went down pretty big. They lost by a solid margin. So it was Warnock's strategy that helped him get this far. I mean, and any other generic candidate might have gone down with the rest of the Democratic candidates, but he ran towards a swing voter. You know, he appealed to that moderate swing voter set who couldn't stomach Herschel Walker, but liked Raphael Warnock's policies. And I think that's what got him this far. So, you know, of course, there's disappointment. But if you look at the overall climate and you look at Joe Biden's approval ratings, which were lower than 40% here in Georgia, it is a testament to that strategy that there even is a runoff here in Georgia.
Hey, Greg, this is Mark Murray. You're one of my go-to experts in Georgia. Tell us about the remaining vote in the Senate contest and how you actually expect that to break. Is it enough for maybe Warnock to avoid a runoff? Break that down for us.
There is a very small chance that Warnock could avoid runoff, but none of his strategists are openly talking about that possibility. You know, he has to hold out that hope, of course, in that speech. But it looks like we are almost certainly headed to a runoff. And I can tell you that folks here in Georgia are already preparing for that possibility / dreading that possibility because it means 4 more weeks of ads and all through Thanksgiving. But unlike last year, actually, it was a 9-week runoff that went through Christmas and even New Year's. That has been shortened to 4 weeks. So some of our holidays won't be ruined, at least.
Yeah, no kidding. At least it's not going through Christmas this time.
Turn the TV back
That's
on
important to note.
Yeah.
Let's switch to the governor's race. Tremaine, I want to ask you about that. NBC News is projecting a defeat for Democrat Stacey Abrams. Incumbent Republican Brian Kemp scores another term in what was a rematch from 4 years ago. Walk us through the results and some of the reaction we're hearing in this one this morning.
I'll tell you what, Joe, this is going to be a tough loss for a lot of people who supported Stacey Abrams, even though the polling, as much as we can trust the polling, especially in last night's election, the polling had already suggested that Kemp was favored to win this race. But let's not forget, you know, Stacey Abrams really helped build the apparatus that pushed Georgia into the kind of purple space. She's already an icon among organizers and activists. And so there was a lot of hope that this second time around she could pull it off, but it simply wasn't enough. And so certainly disappointment, but the machine that she built has really reshaped the electorate here in Georgia, ushering hundreds of thousands of new registered voters, especially hard to reach folks, black folks, rural people in rural communities. So even though that machine is kind of sturdy, it wasn't enough to deliver her a victory. Let's take a listen to what she had to say last night.
I may no longer be seeking the office of governor, but I will never stop doing everything in my power to ensure that the people of Georgia have a voice. I know the results are what we hope for tonight, and I understand that you are hurting and you are disappointed. I am too. We may not have made it to the finish line, but we ran that race, and we know this path, and we know that running is what matters, that standing is what matters, that defending is what matters.
Even in loss, she may really have transcended state politics to become something else, a different kind of figure here. So even though she lost last night, I'm sure it's not the last time, certainly, we're going to see Stacey Abrams.
All right, Tremaine, Greg, thank you both so much. We appreciate your expertise this morning. And now let's head west to Arizona. We've got NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Rafa there with us. We also have Tara Cavalier, politics reporter at the Arizona Republic. Thank you both for joining us. Ali, I'll start off with you. So let's talk through where we're at right now. Two big races there, like in Georgia, Senate and governor seats up for grabs. What is the latest tally on both races this morning?
Yeah, Savannah, well, Arizona election officials had been predicting that these races wouldn't be able to be called on election night and possibly for a few days after. And I can tell you from personal experience, repeatedly checking these vote tallies this morning, it's becoming more and more obvious why they were saying that. We have the latest wave of tallies here in Arizona happening just after 4 a.m. local time, and it's showing that around 62% of the vote in this state has been counted. Democrats have a slight edge over Republicans, and the margins just keep getting tighter and tighter. Listen to some of these numbers. For Arizona's governor, Democrat Katie Hobbs at 51% of the vote compared to Republican Kari Lake's 49%. In the Senate race in this state, incumbent Democratic Senator Mark Kelly at 52% support compared to Republican Blake Masters' 46%. So in the next few hours, we expect the vote tallies to shift more in Republicans' favor, after all, because Republicans had been more in favor of voting in the last 72 hours, specifically on Election Day in person.
Tara, let's focus specifically on the Senate race right now. Incumbent Senator Mark Kelly did speak with supporters last night. First, here's a little bit of what he said.
From day one, this campaign for me hasn't been, it hasn't been about name calling or dividing people. It's been about telling the truth. It's been about bringing together Republicans, Democrats, and independents in every corner of our state focused on solving problems.
So, Tara, what else did he have to say? And behind the scenes, how is his camp feeling right now as these results slowly come in?
Sure. Well, his campaign said that after the first drop of ballots at 8 o'clock Arizona time last night, they were up by 8 points. They felt pretty good about the race, and they certainly did that.
Ali, let's switch over now to the governor race there. So this has been a big talker. Kari Lake is continuing to push these unfounded and, above all, false claims of a stolen election after an issue that we saw happen yesterday with vote tabulating machines in Maricopa County. First, tell us a little bit about what exactly did happen and what election officials are saying in terms of how it may have impacted or not impacted, and then talk about the spread of misinformation.
Yeah, Savannah. So Kari Lake was one of several Republicans that were spreading misinformation on several social media platforms, misinformation that was that Arizona election officials were trying to debunk in real time as it was being spread out there via video, tweets, Facebook posts. And this is all because we know that 60 out of Maricopa County's 223 polling sites had machines that were experiencing these printer issues that according to election officials, every fourth or fifth ballot was just not being accepted into this machine. It wasn't misreading them, rather, it just wasn't accepting them at all. Now, since yesterday, we have learned that at least 17 of those 60 polling sites have had their machines fixed, whether more have been fixed overnight or whether more have been taken here possibly to the Maine County Recorder's Office is still unclear. But we do know that Kari Lake was, as I mentioned, among several Republicans who were spreading these misinformation about people having to stay in line because of long lines caused by these machines. And despite all of this, she came out during her election watch party last night, slamming the process that election officials were using to get all of these votes tabulated yesterday. Take a listen to what she had to say.
We had a big day today, and don't let those cheaters and crooks think anything different. We had great patriots around this state show up today. It was so amazing. They showed up at the polls early this morning, only to be told the election equipment didn't work.
Election officials offered voters several other options to be able to get their votes counted in time before polls closed yesterday. And election officials inside tell us that those votes will start to be counted in less than 2 hours now when this office opens at 7 a.m. Savannah.
Tara, you don't have to look back very far to a time when Arizona had 2 Republican senators along with the Republican governor. Now suddenly they have 2 Democratic senators, and we have these very, very close races here in 2022. And it's really a purple state now. Help us understand the independent voters there who swing things back and forth and just how crucial that independent vote is.
Well, independent voters consist of a third of registered voters in the state. But I guess I would disagree with the assertion that Arizona is a purple state. I think that it's still very much a red state when you look at voter registration, but candidate quality really matters. And so, for example, Senator Kelly was a very strong candidate. And same with the Attorney General candidate, Chris Mays, who is tracking along the same lines as her counterpart, Dee Hobb, in the governor's race.
All right, Allie and Tara, thank you both so very much. We appreciate it. And for a look at the big picture here, we want to bring in NBC News reporter Julie Sirkin. Julie, good morning to you. So as things stand right now, Republicans have been able to flip, I believe, 11 seats in the House with a net gain of 8 seats. Walk us through how that happens. We don't really know who's going to control the House yet, but what it could mean for the Biden agenda moving forward if Republicans do, at the very least, have control of the House.
Yeah, well, look, good morning to you guys. Look, in the words of Senator Lindsey Graham, this was anything but a red wave. And in the House, remember, as you've heard all along, Republicans only needed to pick up 5 seats in order to take control of the House. So the question since yesterday was really how many seats they're going to have an advantage of rather than will they win. It's notable that at this hour, the morning after election night, and what was supposed to be, according to many Republicans, I've spoken to a sweep for Republicans, that we still don't know who will control the House and who will control the Senate. But to your point, if Speaker McCarthy potentially is working with a narrow margin of 5, 7, anything really under that 25 to 30 threshold they thought they were going to get, he's going to have to make tougher decisions in order to try and get things passed. We're not looking at a Congress that will essentially be able to send massive pieces of legislation to President Biden's desk because Biden still holds the veto pen. But instead, we're looking potentially at a Republican-controlled House. Potentially, we don't know yet what's going to happen in the Senate, that will focus almost certainly on investigation.
Let's talk about the Senate and kind of what the potential options are here and how Democrats may be feeling, specifically because of flipping that seat in Pennsylvania with the win for John Fetterman. What do you think that means Democrats are feeling now about their chances of holding on to at least the Senate?
I think Democrats are feeling good. When I was talking to Republicans the last couple of weeks, they were telling me they thought they'd pick up 52, 53 seats. Now we're seeing much tighter margins. Democrats at this hour could potentially hold the Senate, or it could be split 50-50. We really don't know the direction in which it'll go. But Democrats hanging on to New Hampshire, for example, with Maggie Hassan. Some of these other key races, of course, we don't know yet, like Mark Kelly, but he is edging above his opponent, Blake Masters. They're really being able to hold on to their own, flipping that seat in Pennsylvania that you mentioned as well, that Republicans that I spoke to yesterday, hours before the polls closed, were telling me they still thought Oz had a chance in Pennsylvania. Georgia's going to come down to the wire. We already know that. The runoff in December, but Minority Leader McConnell, who potentially could be majority leader still, has been saying in last recent months that it all comes down to candidate quality. He's been setting the stage in numerous press conferences that he's been holding, seeming to suggest that these Trump-backed candidates aren't going to perform well when it comes to the general election. We'll see if he's right.
All right, Julie Sirkin, thank you so much. And Mark, looming over all of this, any race in the country is always going to be the former president, Donald Trump. What factor does it look like he played in these midterms?
Yeah, Joe, I was talking about the enthusiasm, which is one of the big reasons why we had a surprise. But the Trump factor also, I think, is really glaring at us. And as you were talking to our reporters from coast to coast, starting with the East Coast and then going to the West Coast, what did stand out to me was that the candidates that Donald Trump really wasn't behind did very well. Talk about Brian Kemp in Georgia. Certainly ended up defeating Donald Trump's primary challenger back in May. Won decisively over Stacey Abrams. We didn't talk about Ron DeSantis' nearly 20-point win in Florida. A big decisive win. But then we look at the races that we did call. Mehmet Oz. Donald Trump endorsed Mehmet Oz over David McCormick in Pennsylvania. We ended up having a situation where Herschel Walker, whom Donald Trump's handpicked for that race, we might be headed to a runoff there. And so looking at the candidates that Donald Trump endorsed and the ones that ended up losing and are struggling, I think really does stand out to me.
Right.
Mark Murray, we are so happy to have you here with us this morning. You will be with us throughout the next hour, and we will have more election coverage, of course, also throughout the morning. But we're also following other major headlines here on Morning News Now.
Up next, WNBA star Brittany Griner moved out of a Russian prison. We'll tell you where she has been transferred to.
All right, it's November 9th, and we are tracking a strong tropical storm Nicole, expected to become a Category 1 storm as it makes landfall overnight in Florida. I'll have your full forecast coming up.
Let's now get a check on your Morning News Now weather.
Michelle Grossman is with us. Michelle, good morning.
Good morning, guys. So good to see you. I know it's so busy for you, and it's busy in the weather world, too, because we are tracking a strong tropical storm. We're looking at winds right around 70 miles per hour. It is expected to become a Category 1 storm as it makes landfall overnight in the state of Florida. So we will see it strengthen as we go throughout the day on this Wednesday. As I said, winds at 70 miles per hour. It's moving southwest at 13 miles per hour, now impacting portions of northwestern Bahamas. But you can see those outer rain bands even already at this hour impacting portions of Florida. Also, the winds are starting to pick up. We're going to start to see conditions deteriorate as we go throughout this Wednesday before it does make that landfall overnight. So many tropical alerts from the coastal portions of South Carolina, also Georgia, into the state of Florida. We have hurricane warnings. That's where you see the red for portions of northwestern Bahamas, also Florida. We have a tropical storm warning also for the Bahamas and most of Florida into Georgia and also South Carolina. Also have some watches, too. That's really more about the time frame. When we have a watch, that means we're going to see those conditions within the next 48 hours. So this is what we're expecting in terms of timing. Today, Nicole will intensify as it approaches Florida. We're going to see rain and wind lashing eastern Florida and also the Bahamas. Heavy downpours. Could see 8 inches of rain in some spots. It's that tropical moisture, the tropical downpours. Then that center of Nicole will cross over the state of Florida. It's going to quickly weaken into a tropical storm, but still there's a lot of wind with it. There's a lot of rain. Then it's going to take a right-hand turn. So it's going to make a second landfall somewhere along the Gulf Coast of Florida. It's going to turn right and move up the east coast of Florida. Look at all that rain associated with it. Also, these winds stretch well far outside from the center of Nicole. So lots of people will be experiencing some really heavy rainfall over the next several days and also some really gusty winds. First, let's talk about the heavy rainfall because we are expecting the heaviest along the east coast of Florida. We could see isolated amounts up to 8 inches. Of course, that's going to cause some flash flooding, some street, highway, and also stream flooding. And that's going to be the case, too, as we head towards the northeast and mid-Atlantic, also New England, guys. We could see some flash flooding as well. And we could see winds gusting up to 82 miles per hour at times. We'll talk more about Nicole in the next hour.
All right. Thank you, Michelle. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We do want to tell you about some other stories making news today.
That's right. We're going to start with new updates on Brittany Griner. According to a statement from her lawyer, the WNBA player is being moved to a penal colony. Her attorneys say we don't have any information on her exact current location or her final destination. Now, this comes after Griner was sentenced to 9 years in prison in August after police say they found vape canisters containing cannabis oil in her luggage.
Elon Musk has sold nearly $4 billion in Tesla shares, according to filings with the Securities and Exchange Commission. This move comes after Musk's recent $44 billion acquisition of Twitter. Musk had already sold about $15 billion in Tesla stock earlier in the year.
Speaking of billions, we have a winner. A lucky California ticket holder is the winner of the record-breaking $2 billion Powerball prize. I'm still here. It wasn't me.
Yeah, it was.
The winner has not been identified, but the owner of the gas station where the ticket was sold was all smiles after receiving a $1 million check for themselves.
Bad for that person, too.
Yeah,
very cool.
Awesome. Yeah. All right. Coming up, more results from the high-stakes midterm elections.
Several races are still too close to call. More on the biggest victories so far for President Biden and Democrats, plus the key races we are still watching. You're watching Morning News Now. Welcome back to our continuing coverage of the midterm election here on NBC News Now. The balance of power in Washington remains very much up for grabs this morning. It was a good night for Republicans in the race for the House. NBC News' latest projections show Republicans picking up 8 seats. There are still several races that have not yet been called, so control of that chamber is still uncertain.
Meanwhile, control of the Senate is also still up in the air. At this hour, Democrats currently hold a 2-seat lead. They would need 2 more victories to retain control of the chamber. Georgia is the big race many eyes are watching, but that race is likely headed to a runoff in December.
We want to take a look at some other significant races as well. One particular race that's not yet been called is New York's 17th congressional district. There, Democratic incumbent Sean Patrick Maloney, who also leads the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, which is responsible for getting Democrats elected, he trails his Republican challenger, Mike Lawler.
Election night also provided some historical firsts in Massachusetts. Current state attorney general Maura Healey is projected to become the state's first elected woman governor and the first LGBTQ person to do so. She defeated Republican Jeff Deal last night.
And Sarah Huckabee Sanders will become Arkansas's next governor. The former White House press secretary under President Trump will be the first woman governor of that state, and of course follows in her father's footsteps. He was also governor there.
That's right. Also a millennial, by the way, as we sort of start to see some generational shifts happening in several races. Wes Moore also being elected. We now want to bring in Mark Murray again. Not even bring in, just go back to you. You've been here on set with us all morning. You will continue to be. Mark, I'm hoping that maybe you could just reset a little bit for people who are just joining us, maybe people who aren't always following politics, but this is just where they come to get their morning news, and that's all we're talking about today. To talk through when we're talking about too close to call, too early to call, kind of the differences on some of those. Also, we'll see some races that have way less of the vote in, less votes counted. There's still a lot to count, but we've been able to call it versus some that have 98% of the vote in, that kind of thing. Walk us through that.
Yeah, we have a decision desk that are looking at statistical models, so all the vote that has been counted, the vote that still is to be remaining, and you're right. We have different calls. So it's like just too close to call. That is that the margin, the candidates are separated by a couple percentage points or so, and the remaining vote could break either direction, and there's no uncertainty through the models that our decision desk is working on. Too early to call means we still don't have enough vote to basically know who is, and then sometimes they end up having it's too close to call, but a certain candidate is ahead by a slight amount of margin, or it's too early to call, but a candidate is ahead. But the important thing to know about our decision desk is that they don't make a call on a race, even with there's still some vote that's outstanding, unless it is 99.5% at the very least sure that our models show that this candidate will end up still winning once all the vote has been counted. So you're exactly right. Sometimes, we call a race, a candidate's ahead by 6 or 7 points, and there's still 20% of the vote left. Right. We know for certain that the remaining vote, there isn't enough for that person to be able to catch up, and that's what our decision desk does all night long and through this morning and tomorrow.
They told us recently they get less sleep than Steve Kornacki this time of year, so which is saying something. All right.
Mark, thanks so much. We'll keep you here. Jump in at any point, but now let's get to NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memley. Mike, good morning. So let's talk through the mood in the White House last night as results started coming in. Have we gotten any reaction from the president this morning?
So we haven't heard from the president yet, but we expect to hear from him this afternoon. Presidents typically will address the nation and hold a press conference on the day after a midterm elections. And we've seen in the past that's often to take a little bit of a humble pie, as they say. We know that presidents typically see shellacking, as one president put it, a thumping, as another president put it, in his first midterm election. But we're looking at what is likely to be the best first midterm election for a Democratic president, a sitting president of any party, really in at least 20 years, and perhaps one of the best in the last century. So there's a lot of White House officials I'm talking to who are already touting some of the results that we're seeing. We just heard from White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain, who is touting the strong turnout, for instance, of young voters and saying it's a result of the president keeping his promises on things like action on climate change and student loan debt relief. And we're likely to hear a lot of talk about the president's consistent advocacy for things like protecting abortion rights. He's sometimes took criticism for giving those remarks that he did just recently about it at a time when everyone said the #1 issue was the economy. And so this is a White House that's eager to take a lot of credit. The president had a late night. He called more than 3 dozen Democratic winners last night, and we expect he'll make more calls today as the results continue to come in.
Mike, I have to imagine the president breathed a big sigh of relief when Pennsylvania was called for John Fetterman overnight, especially considering the president actually did go there and campaign. What is the reaction to that win in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, you've probably heard me use this stat, the president traveling to Pennsylvania 18 times over the course of the last year and a half, more than any other state other than Delaware and Maryland, of course. And we know he goes there a lot on the weekends. But consider this, if the city of Philadelphia was a state, it would be more than any other state except for Delaware and Maryland. And so this was obviously a high priority for President Biden. And it was a result that played out well for the Democrats, obviously. Fetterman and Josh Shapiro, the gubernatorial candidate, winning a strong victory. Notably as well, some of the battleground House districts also coming in Democrats' favor. Now, this is a state that's close to the president's heart as his birth state, obviously from Scranton, but we know also the role it played in 2020. It was what put him over the top, made him the president-elect of the United States in 2020. And we know that the roadmap for 2024, if the president does run again, also runs squarely through Pennsylvania. So this was a down payment, let's say, in a potential future campaign as well.
Yeah, so Mike, while Pennsylvania was somewhat surprisingly already called, there's still a lot, of course, as you just mentioned, that hasn't been called. We still don't have the final result here for the Senate or the House. But, you know, having had this long conversation for a while now about the fact that there could be this red wave, let's talk about how the president potentially prepared a legislative agenda for the possibility of having to work with Republicans in either one, potentially both chambers of Congress. What does that look like? What's he prepared for?
Well, the most significant result from the perspective of the White House is the fact that the Democrats still have a chance to maintain control of the Senate. That's so important for, if nothing else, nominating more judges and getting more cabinet potential vacancies that we might see in the coming weeks and months confirmed for the president's cabinet. But let's also talk about what might happen legislatively. If Republicans have a narrow majority, the president is going to be looking to do what he promised to do, to unite the country, to work across the aisle. There might be Republicans in districts that bode well for Democrats down the road or for the president in 2024, where Republicans might feel the need to cross the aisle. But I've also heard from a White House official who said the narrower the Republican majority, if they do have the majority, the more difficult it's going to be for them to get anything passed on their own in terms of their own policy priorities. And it might mean the thing that unifies the Republican caucus is investigation, investigation, investigation. You can do a lot with committee chairmanships, even if you don't have a strong governing majority. And so the White House is bracing for that possibility as well.
All right, Mike Memoli, as always, thank you so much. We'll talk to you in a bit. Coming up from Washington to Wall Street, more on the impacts of the midterm elections.
Yeah, up next, we're going to look at how the markets are reacting to the results so far. Stay with us. You are watching Morning News Now.
We are back now, of course, with our continuing coverage of the midterm elections.
Of course, one of the biggest issues for voters this year has been the economy. So we want to look at how that's impacting the results. And here to help us answer that is NBC News business and data reporter Brian Chung. Brian, good to have you with us. First, let's just talk about the state of the economy right now and just how big of an issue it is for voters as they were heading to the polls.
Well, good morning, guys. And as a reminder, 8.2% inflation, that's what Americans are dealing with. Although the labor market looking okay with unemployment near multi-decade lows. But we had some exit polling from NBC News done yesterday as those who voted left. And we heard that nationwide, 32% of Americans said that inflation was their top issue. But this was interestingly divided up among the cohorts of people voting as Republicans, where 44% said inflation was the top issue. That's a big jump compared to Democrats, where only 15% of them listed inflation as a top issue. Abortion, in many cases for Democrats, remaining their top issue. Now, this is a bit surprising when you consider the outcome of the midterm elections being a lot more competitive for the Democrats, especially given, well, if inflation was the top issue and more Republicans were saying that, why didn't they perform better in some of these House and Senate races? Interesting to see, but regardless, inflation seeming to be the top issue in these midterm elections.
Yeah, Brian, so this sort of touches on what you just mentioned, but if we talk about some of these key battleground states, of course, Pennsylvania, maybe Georgia, we're still waiting on results there. How does this economic data factor in here? Like, what does it look like in those states in terms of their unemployment rate, things like that, that would help us maybe understand some of the results we're seeing, or maybe not?
Yeah, well, I am your data reporter, so we do have some data here on some individual states. These are a few battlegrounds, certainly not the only ones, but these are the unemployment rates. And again, when we talk about inflation, it's not a good picture, but unemployment and the labor market appears to be very healthy. Now, the average right now nationwide is 3.7%, but I want to highlight two states for you right now. Check out Nevada right here, 4.4%. Las Vegas specifically was very hard hit by the pandemic. Unemployment went up to get this 30% during 2020. So perhaps that could be some of the reason behind Catherine Cortez Masto lagging behind Adam Laxalt in that particular Senate race because of maybe some of the negative views on how that state particularly handled the lockdowns. But I also want to cast light on Pennsylvania for a different reason. John Fetterman winning that Senate race there, 4.1%, a little bit higher than the national average. But this is a very unionized state. The amount of people in Pennsylvania that are unionized, about 13%, higher than the national average of about 10%. And we've heard John Fetterman and Dr. Oz talk about right to work versus right to unionize. That could be a factor behind what we saw in those results as well.
So, Brian, looking ahead, how is control of Congress going to possibly change economic policies going forward, especially if you have, at least one chamber controlled by Republicans?
Yeah, well, inflation is a complicated picture. When we talk about food, for example, there are just shortages that really can't be done regardless of who's in power. But look, there's a lot of other things that factor into the economy beyond inflation. Possible rise in unemployment. You're hearing some Wall Street firms say we could be entering a recession next year. That's going to be something that the next Congress is going to have to deal with. But it's not the only thing. There's a debt ceiling debate that's likely going to happen very soon in the next Congress. Federal funding is going to enter in the fold. Does that enter the possibility of a government shutdown during a time of recession? Also, remember, there are other types of issues right now. Antitrust, big tech legislation. Does that get thrown under the bus if it is indeed the case that the Republicans take the House, but it's still a Democratic administration? And then lastly, again, unionization, as I just illustrated with Pennsylvania, very much a factor of this tight labor market that we're probably going to expect to see some debate on as well.
All right, Brian, laying it all out. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. We're going to have midterm results and analysis, even more of it coming up.
That's right. Also, several candidates already making their victory or concession speeches. Hear from them next on Morning News Now. Stay with us.
All right, welcome back. We're bringing in NBC News senior political editor Mark Murray and senior national political reporter John Allen to help us as we wrap up this hour here. Mark, let's talk about the economy, which we were just talking about, and President Biden. I mean, conventional wisdom tells us sitting president, that's bad. Bad economy, that's bad. Low approval rating, that's bad. And yet somehow Democrats seem to be defying expectations. What's going on?
Yeah, midterm election is supposed to usually be a referendum on the brand new president. And we looked at President Joe Biden's job rating in our poll, and actually in the exit poll, it was like in the mid 40s, 44%, 45%. That is danger zone. Then, all the stuff on the economy, the focus on inflation. This was supposed to be you add all that up, and this was supposed to be a big Republican night. But what our final NBC News poll kind of pointed out, we asked this one question: what worries you more, that Joe Biden and the Democrats, will have the status quo policies, or that Republicans will go too far if they end up getting control? And by 2 points, people were more concerned that Republicans would go too far. And I think that was a big clue on how this was maybe more of a choice than a referendum.
Interesting. And now let's talk about the opposite. The former President Trump. Talk to us about his effect here, John.
I mean, it's a bad night for Donald Trump in a number of ways. You saw a bunch of the candidates that he had endorsed and pushed, his hand-picked candidates, lose. Some of them election deniers, the kind of people that would have been in positions to get power and perhaps help him in 2024. So all of that's bad. The Republicans being short of the big wave that he predicted makes him look bad. And of course, Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, wins a 20-point romp for re-election, the main rival potentially to Trump. So Donald Trump is demonstrably, measurably weaker today than he was yesterday. And at the same time, as Mark points out, Joe Biden is stronger today than he was yesterday.
And Ron DeSantis still has a lot in the bank for a potential run, so we'll have to see about that.
All right, Mark Murray, John Allen, thank you both so much. We appreciate it.
Both be with us. Thank you very much. Now, overnight history was made by Democrats who were able to pick up 2 governorships in Massachusetts and Maryland, while Florida Republican candidates, as we were just talking about, cruised to victory.
Here's some of the candidates and what they had to say last night during their victory and concession speeches.
You're not always going to agree with every vote that I take. You're not going to agree with every single amendment that I offer in the United States Senate. I will never forget where I came from, and I will never forget the great people of Ohio. Thank you for this honor to serve you.
As someone who was the Democratic nominee, I have the privilege to concede this race to J.D. Vance, because the way this country operates is that when you lose an election, you concede.
tonight, voters from Gen Z to our seniors, people from all different walks of life, have given me the honor of a lifetime to give me the chance to serve you as Pennsylvania's next governor.
The ground on which you are standing right now is now going to be represented for the first time by an Hispanic Republican woman, Monica De La Cruz. She'll go to Congress, and the first thing she will do is to fire Nancy Pelosi as Speaker.
Progress is not inevitable, but progress is possible in the state of Maryland. And I am truly humbled to be part of this legacy.
I'm not going to lie to you, this is a difficult race. We're not doing as well as I had hoped in places like Baltimore County. So I don't want to give you some false hopes to stay here for the rest of the night. I am excited to continue to watch the votes to be counted, all the votes.
We made promises to the people of Florida, and we have delivered on those promises. And so today, after 4 years, the people have delivered their verdict. Freedom is here to stay.
It's been an absolute blessing to serve as your governor before, to serve as the congressman from my hometown. Governor DeSantis, to you and your family, I wish you only the best, and I wish the best to my fellow Floridians.
Gosh, it's great to be here, gathered in the red county of Miami-Dade. The most important thing is we're not just going to elect Republican senators, we're going to elect new people with fire in the belly, who know why they're running. They're running to save America.
Things did not quite turn out the way we had hoped, but that's all right. I have spoken with Senator Rubio, and I congratulated him and said to him that Florida is our home state, and please continue to work hard for the place we call home.
And we will keep bringing you more, of course. And also tonight, be sure to watch our Meet the Press election results special. That's with Chuck Todd and the entire NBC News team. They'll be breaking down the big races and what it all means for the country going forward. That is tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern, right here on NBC News Now. You can stay here all day.
Exactly.
Just keep watching.
And that does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.